There are things you don't understand about a house until you've lived inside its silence, until you've walked its floors at 2 in the morning. Memorize which boards creak and which ones hold. Listen to the way the pipes knock in the cold and the way the walls breathe differently in the rain. Until you've spent years inside those rooms while everyone else walk away, you don't understand what a house is really made of, and you sure don't understand what it might be hiding. My name is Della Marsh, and I grew up in a house that most people in our county call an embarrassment. A gray two-story on the edge of what used to be farmland on the south side of Holt's Fork, Tennessee. 6 rooms, a root cellar, a detached workshop behind the property, and 41 years of accumulation stacked floor to ceiling in nearly every one of them. My mother's house, my grandmother's house before that, and her mother's before her. People in town called it the Hoarder House. Not always behind our backs, either. I called it home. My mother, Ruthanne Marsh, was not a careless woman. She was a frightened one. There's a difference, though it took me 34 years to understand it. She kept things away some people keep prayers, compulsively, desperately, because throwing anything away felt like admitting that loss was permanent. After my father left, after her own mother died in the back bedroom on a Tuesday morning in October, after the small flower shop she'd run for 11 years flooded in the summer of 2009, and the insurance company sent back a letter that basically said, "Not our problem," she kept boxes of newspapers, bags and side bags, furniture piled on furniture, canning jars filled with buttons and string, and things she could not name but could not bear to release. The house grew heavier every year, and we, her 3 children, grew up navigating its narrow paths like we were walking to the bones of something enormous that had died standing up. My brother Keith left at 19, went to Knoxville, got a business degree, married a woman named Paige who had opinions about minimalism and open floor plans. He came back to Holt's Fork only when he had to. When he did, he stood in the doorway of Mama's house with his jaw set, breathing through his nose, trying not to touch anything. My sister Lorraine left at 22, moved to Nashville, worked in real estate, wore blazers. She called Mama on Sundays, sometimes sent money occasionally in the years when things got tight. But she couldn't be in that house for more than an hour without her shoulders rising toward her ears and her voice going thin and clipped. I stayed, not because I had nowhere else to go. I had offers. I had a nursing certificate and a job at Holt County Medical Center, and a man named Gerald who asked me to move to Chattanooga with him in 2019 and looked genuinely confused when I said I couldn't leave Mama alone. I had a life that could have spread outward in the way lives do when you let them. But my mother needed someone who understood the weight of what she carried. Someone who could walk through the narrow paths without flinching. Someone who could sit beside her at the kitchen table when the darkness came and not make her feel ashamed of it. So I stayed, and I kept up the house as best I could. I managed her medications. I dealt with the property tax notices when they came. I negotiated with a code enforcement officer, a young man named Travis who had the decency to be apologetic about his job. I shoveled the walk in winter and fixed the gutters in fall and kept the back workshop padlocked because Mama said nobody needed to go in there, and I respected that the way I respected most of her quiet instructions. I knew the house. I knew its history. I knew what it had survived. What I did not know was what it was hiding. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Ruthanne Marsh died on a Thursday morning in March, just after the first thaw. She had been declining for 2 years. Her heart, the doctor said, had simply worked itself through. She passed quietly in the hospital, in a room with a window that looked out over the parking lot. And I held her hand until it was over. She didn't say anything significant at the end. There was no deathbed revelation. She just squeezed my fingers once, and then she didn't. I thought grief would feel like something I recognized. I had watched other people lose parents. I had held strangers' hands through it at the hospital. But Mama's death was different. It was a particular kind of silence, the kind that comes when you've been listening for something your whole life, and then there is simply nothing left to listen for. Keith and Lorraine arrived within 48 hours. Keith drove up from Knoxville in his silver Lexus, still wearing his work slacks when he walked through the front door. Lorraine flew into Knoxville and rented a car. She was on the phone when she came in, something about a listing, and held up one finger at me as she finished the call. I had already arranged a funeral, already called Mama's few friends, already spoken with Pastor Waverly, already done what I always did, which was everything. We buried Ruthanne Marsh on a Saturday under a gray sky that couldn't decide whether to snow or not. There were maybe 30 people at the graveside, neighbors who remembered when Mama was young, a few women from the church, Travis from code enforcement, which surprised me, but maybe shouldn't have. He'd known her longer than either of my siblings had bothered to. After the burial, we three went back to the house. And that's when things stopped being a family and started being something else. Keith sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I don't know where he got it. He must have brought it from home, which told me everything about how he'd spent the drive up. He had a pen in his hand before we'd even taken off our coats. "We need to talk about this state," he said. Lorraine unwound her scarf and looked around the kitchen with the expression she always wore in this house. Careful, controlled, faintly pained. "Yes," she said, "we do. I put on water for coffee because that is what you do. Can we have one night?" I asked. "We've had years," Keith said, and the way he said it, tired, a little impatient, not quite unkind, but right next to it, told me the conversation had already been had between the two of them before they arrived. I just hadn't been invited. He laid it out on the legal pad. The house, he said, appraising, assessed at $87,000, though given the condition, and here he paused in a way that communicated volumes, likely to sell below that. The contents would need to be professionally cleared. He'd already gotten a quote from a junk removal company, just to have a number. $4,500 minimum, plus there was the matter of the back taxes. Mama had fallen behind in her last 2 years. The total outstanding was $48,000. Lorraine added that they'd have to move fast. Code enforcement had flagged the property twice in the past decade. If it sat vacant, the county might step in. "We could list it as is," Lorraine said. "Take the loss on the price and walk away clean. Or we pay the taxes, clear it out, and get the proper value," Keith said. They went back and forth. I sat with my coffee and listened to them divide our mother's life into line items on a legal pad. "What about the workshop?" I said finally. They both looked at me. "The detached workshop out back. It's not been opened in, I don't know, years." Keith checked his notes. "It's included in the parcel. Whatever's in there gets cleared with the rest." Mama kept it locked. "Mama kept everything," Lorraine said, not cruelly, but not gently either. "That doesn't mean it means anything." And just like that, it was decided the house would be listed. The debt would be paid from whatever proceeds were left, which might be nothing, which meant the three of us might owe money on top of nothing. They'd split whatever equity remained equally, 1/3 each. I did not say, "I've lived here for 14 years. I did not say, "I kept the property taxes current until 2 years ago when Mama got sick and the bills piled up." I did not say, "I'm the one who negotiated with Travis. I'm the one who managed her doctors. I'm the one who knew which drawer had the insurance papers and which box had the original deed, and where Mama kept the emergency money in the coffee tin above the refrigerator." I did not say any of it, because I recognized the shape of what was happening. I had seen it before in other families. The ones who stay become invisible. The ones who leave become the decision-makers, not out of malice, usually just out of the way power quietly rearranges itself in the absence of conversation. I said, "I'd like to clear the workshop myself before you bring in the junk company." Keith shrugged. "Fine, just don't take too long." I went out to the workshop the next morning while Keith and Lorraine were on separate phone calls in separate rooms. The lock was an old master padlock, the kind with the long shackle, rusted orange at the hinge. Mama had given me the key years ago, tucked in my hand one evening without explanation, and said, "That one's for the workshop," and walked back inside before I could ask. I had never used it. I had respected whatever it was she needed that door to remain closed. The key still fit. The door swung open with the particular resistance of long disuse, swollen against the frame, and I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Old oil, cold concrete, paper time. something like the inside of a grandfather clock that hadn't been wound in decades. It was dark until I found a string hanging from the ceiling and pulled it, and a single bulb came on, throwing yellow light across a space about the size of a single-car garage, maybe larger. It was not the chaos of the house. That's what struck me first and stayed with me longest. The house was 40 years of accumulated everything, but the workshop was orderly, swept, deliberate. Shelves along the left wall holding mason jars of sorted hardware, screws by size, bolts by thread, washers, hinges, all labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. A work table in the center, solid oak, built-in, tools hanging from pegboard on the right wall, most of them older than I was, arranged by type and size. A cabinet in the back corner, wooden, with brass handles, latched shut, and the floor, concrete, poured in sections, as you'd expect in a structure this age. But near the back, beneath the work table, one section was different, slightly darker than the rest. A rectangle, maybe 4 feet by 3, with 2 barely visible seams running along its edges, and what appeared to be a recessed iron ring flush with the surface. I crouched down and looked at it. Then I stood up and went back to the house and told no one. I am a methodical person by nature and by training. 14 years as a nurse will do that. You learn not to react to what surprises you until you understand what you're looking at. So I did not say anything to Keith or Lorraine that morning. I went to work at the hospital for my 3 scheduled shifts, came back each evening to the house where my siblings were growing increasingly restless, and used the quiet hours to think. The seams in the concrete, the iron ring, the orderliness of everything else in that workshop. Mama's instruction never to go in there, not aggressive, not frightened, just firm. The kind of instruction she gave when something mattered to her, in a way she couldn't explain. My grandmother had built the workshop herself in 1971, with help from her husband, Earl Marsh, who died in 1979. I knew this because Mama had told us stories. Earl Marsh had been a mechanic, a machinist, a man who could fix anything with metal in it. He built the workshop to specifications, poured the concrete floor himself. What specifications? I found myself wondering now. And why? On the 4th evening, after Keith went to bed and Lorraine fell asleep on the couch with her phone on her chest, I took a flashlight out to the workshop and got down on my hands and knees and looked at the floor section properly. The iron ring, when I worked my fingers into it and pulled, was connected to a steel plate set into the concrete. The plate moved, not easily. It was heavy, 30 or 40 pounds at least, but it moved, hinged on one side, lifting up like a trapdoor set into the slab. Beneath it was darkness and cool, dry air and stone steps leading down. I shone the flashlight in. The steps went down maybe 8 feet into a small, low-ceiling space, maybe 6 by 8, walls and floor all concrete, the air inside still and cool as a root cellar. And along the back wall, stacked and arranged with the same orderly care I had seen in the workshop above, were things. Old things. Important things. I went down the steps. The first thing I lifted out was a metal cash box, the green kind with the little key lock that used to sit on general store counters. It was not locked. Inside, in rubber-banded stacks gone soft and brittle with age, were bills. Old bills, some of them 50s and hundreds from the 70s and 80s, but also newer ones. I didn't count them. I set the box aside and kept going. There were file boxes, the kind with lids, labeled in my grandmother's hand. Property, deeds, surveys, legal. There were mason jars here too, but these held papers, rolled and tied with string, protected from moisture inside the sealed glass. There was a wooden cigar box holding letters, the envelope still sealed, addressed in a handwriting I didn't recognize to an address I didn't know. And at the back, standing upright against the wall, was a long flat tube of the kind architects use, heavy cardboard, capped at both ends, sealed with electrical tape, turned yellow and crackling with age. I carried everything up the steps. I set it all on the work table under the yellow light, and then I sat on a metal stool and began to understand what I was looking at. The file boxes came first. The one labeled deeds held the original deed to property, which I had seen before, but it also held a second document I had never seen, a deed of transfer, dated 1968, signed by my great-grandmother Ola Marsh, conveying to herself and her heirs in perpetuity the mineral rights appurtenant to the property, separately recorded from the surface title. Recorded at the Holt County Register of Deeds, Book 44, page 211. I read that sentence 3 times. Mineral rights, separately recorded. The box-labeled surveys held exactly what it said. Survey plats, hand-drawn and professionally rendered both, dating from 1948 all the way to 1987. The property they depicted was not just a house lot. The surveys showed a parcel that extended significantly behind and to the south of the house. Land that over the generations had been sold off piecemeal until what remained was the house lot and the small yard. But the mineral rights document I had just read didn't convey only the surface of the current lot. It conveyed the mineral rights to the entirety of the original parcel, all 340 acres. I sat very still for a moment. The box labeled legal held correspondence with a law firm in Knoxville. Letters back and forth, spanning from 1969 to 1989. The name on the firm's letterhead, Alderman, Price and Webb. The name of the attorney who signed most of the letters, a man named Gordon Alderman. The subject of the correspondence, across 20 years of letters, was consistent. The rights were real. They were documented. They were legally defensible. And multiple parties had, over the years, attempted to acquire them. My grandmother had refused every time. The long tube held the blueprints, not architectural blueprints, geological survey maps, the kind produced by State Geological Services, shaded in a particular way that indicates subsurface composition. I am not a geologist, but I have spent enough time on the internet to understand a legend. The shading that covered the bulk of the original 340-acre parcel was labeled high potential formation type indicated, and the formation type was one I recognized from news stories I had seen over the past decade about energy development in the region. Natural gas, possible oil-bearing strata. My hands were not entirely steady when I rolled the map back up. The cigar box of letters was the last thing I opened. The envelopes were sealed, but old. The glue had long since released its grip. I lifted the flap of the first one and removed the letter inside. It was addressed to my grandmother Ola Marsh and dated April 14th, 1979, 2 months before Earl died. It was from a man who identified himself as a land acquisition agent for a company called Southland Resources, Incorporated. The tone was friendly at the start. It became less so toward the end, when she had apparently refused a second meeting. The final paragraph said, "We would encourage Mrs. Marsh to consider her position carefully. Properties in this region have a way of declining in assessed value when the county becomes aware of structural concerns." I read that sentence and felt something cold move through me. There were 11 more letters in that box. They spanned from 1979 to 1993. The companies changed names. The agents changed. The tone shifted across those years from friendly to pressuring to threatening to, in the final letters, an eerie false warmth that was somehow the most unsettling of all. My grandmother had kept every one of them. She had kept them sealed, in a sealed jar, in a sealed vault, under the floor of a locked workshop. She had known exactly what she was sitting on, and she had known exactly who wanted it. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the documents spread across the table and thought about the shape of my family's life, about Mama's flower shop that flooded and the insurance company that wouldn't pay, about the property tax bills that had arrived with increasing frequency in her last years, about the code enforcement visits, about the way the assessed value of the house seemed to climb even as the structure declined, making the taxes higher and harder to manage. I thought about how easy it would be for a family already in debt, already fragmented, already exhausted, to sell property quickly and cheaply to whomever was offering. I thought about my grandmother's instructions, passed my mother, passed, however imperfectly. To me, the workshop stays locked, and the particular way Mama had pressed a key into my hand. Not dramatic, not explaining, just ensuring it went to the right person. Then I went to the hospital for my morning shift, came back that afternoon, and called a lawyer. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. His name was Dennis Hardwick, and he'd been practicing in Holt County for 30 years. I knew of him because he'd handled 2 estate matters for families I knew from the hospital. He was not flashy. He wore a plaid tie and kept a philodendron on his windowsill that looked like it had been there since the Clinton administration. When I walked into his office on a Tuesday afternoon with a file box under one arm and rolled survey map under the other, he looked at me the way good lawyers look at people who come in carrying more than they expected. "Tell me what you have," he said. I told him. I laid out the way I'd been trained to give a patient history, in order, without editorializing, with the documents placed in front of him as I reached a relevant point in the narrative. He did not interrupt. He read carefully. He unrolled the geological survey map and held it up toward the window. He read the mineral rights deed twice, slowly, running his finger along specific clauses the way a man does when he's trying to find a hole in something and can't. When I finished, he set down the last letter from the acquisition agent and looked at me across the desk. "How much do your brother and sister know about this?" he said. "Nothing," I said. "I found it 4 days ago. I haven't told them." He nodded slowly. "The mineral rights conveyance in 1968. Do you know if it was ever challenged?" Based on the correspondence, there were 2 attempts. Both times, the firm Alderman, Price, and Webb sent letters confirming the rights held. The last confirmation was 1989. Is that firm still operating? I looked it up. It's now Alderman and Webb. One of the original partners retired. They're still in Knoxville. Dennis looked at the mineral rights deed again. If this conveyance is clean, and from what I'm reading, it appears to be, and if these geological surveys are accurate, he paused. Do you know what natural gas rights on a 300-plus acre parcel in this formation would be worth in today's market? I had looked that up too. I told him the range I had found. He leaned back in his chair. "That's not a house with $48,000 in back taxes, Ms. Marsh," he said. "That's a different conversation entirely." Part 2, the masterclass revelation. Dennis Harwick moved quickly. That was the first thing I learned about him. He was deliberate in gathering information, and urgent once he had it. Within 48 hours of our first meeting, he had pulled the original recording from the Holt County Register deeds, confirmed the mineral rights conveyance in Book 44, page 211 exactly as the document stated, and placed a call to Alderman and Webb in Knoxville. Gerald Alderman, son of the original Gordon Alderman, called him back within the hour. He remembered the file. He told Dennis that his father had spoken of it often. A woman named Della Marsh, who had been, in his father's words, the most stubborn and clear-headed client he'd represented in 40 years of practice. The mineral rights had been contested twice through informal pressure, and once through an attempted quiet title action in 1986, which Ola had defeated without ever setting foot in a courtroom. Gordon Alderman had prepared the response. The matter had been settled in her favor by default judgment. The rights had never been extinguished. Dennis also reached out to a geological consulting firm in Nashville, Harwood Environmental, who had experience evaluating subsurface mineral potential in the region. He sent them the survey maps I had brought. They called back in 48 hours with a preliminary assessment that made Dennis go quiet on the phone for a long moment before he said, "I see. Yes, thank you." He called me immediately after. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" "Tell me now," I said. A pause. "The formation under that parcel is one of the productive zones they've been drilling in the next county. The surveys your grandmother had done in 1972 and 1981 identified it correctly. Harwood says the rights, conservatively valued at current market rates of the area, with a preliminary production estimate based on comparable formations." He took a breath. "Della, we're talking somewhere between $1.2 and $2.8 million in rights value. Possibly more depending on production." I was sitting on the edge of the work table in the workshop. Outside, the late afternoon, light was going gold through the dirty windows. I put my hand flat on the oak of the table my grandfather built, and breathed. "What do we do?" I said. "We secure the estate," Dennis said, "and then we tell your siblings." I let 2 more days pass. Dennis needed time to prepare the documentation properly. The certified copies from the Register of Deeds, the preliminary geological assessment in writing, the legal summary of the mineral rights chain of title. I used those 2 days the way I always use waiting, quietly, usefully. I cleaned the workshop. I swept and organized and sorted. I went through the file boxes more carefully, now that I understood what I was reading, and made a complete inventory of everything in the vault. I found one more thing I had initially overlooked: a handwritten letter from my grandmother Ola, undated, written on a single sheet of her personal stationery. The light blue kind she'd used my whole childhood for birthday cards and Sunday notes. It was addressed to no one in particular, or maybe to all of us, or maybe just to whoever was standing in the workshop when they needed it most. Earl built this place of work, she had written in her careful, looping hand. But I made it a safe place for other reasons. There are people in this world who believe that what a woman keeps and what a woman builds is theirs for the taking if they wait long enough. They are wrong. They have always been wrong. The ground beneath this house has value that has nothing to do with the house itself. I have done everything I know how to do to protect it. The rest is up to whoever reads this. Don't let them tell you it's worthless. Don't let them tell you to take whatever they offer and be grateful. You are a Marsh. The land is yours. Prove it. I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket. Then I called Keith and Lorraine and told them I needed to speak with them both at the house. That evening, that it was important. Keith arrived first, still in his work clothes, checking his phone as he came in. Lorraine came 20 minutes later, a little breathless, apologizing for the traffic. I had set the kitchen table with coffee and the file boxes and the rolled survey map. Dennis Hardwick was already there, seated at the far end of the table, his plaid tie neatly in place, his briefcase at his feet. Keith looked at Dennis, then at me. His expression shifted slightly, not alarmed, but recalibrating. "Who's this?" he said. "Dennis Hardwick. He's an estate attorney. I've retained him." "Retained him for what?" Lorraine said, sitting down slowly. "The estate is pretty straightforward." "I thought so, too," I said. "Sit down, Keith." He sat. I stood at the end of the table opposite Dennis and laid it out. I began with the workshop, what I had found when I had found it. I showed him the photograph I had taken of the vault before removing anything. I put the mineral rights deed in front of them, and Keith picked it up immediately, frowning, reading fast the way he always read documents, looking for problem in them. "Where did this come from?" he said. "The vault." "What vault?" Lorraine said. "Under the workshop floor." They looked at each other. I kept going. I laid out the survey maps. I put Dennis's summary of the geological assessment in front of them, the one on hardwood environmental letterhead, with a preliminary valuation range printed clearly at the bottom of the second page. Lorraine picked it up and read it. I watched her face. She went very still. Keith took it from her. He read more slowly this time. The rapid scan was gone. His jaw tightened in a way I had not seen since the summer he lost his job and didn't tell anyone for 3 weeks. "This can't be right," he said. "I thought that too," I said. "Dennis?" Dennis walked him through it methodically, the way he had walked me through it. The recording in the Register of Deeds, the chain of title, the failed quiet title action in 1986, the current geological assessment. He answered Keith's questions, and Keith had many, increasingly technical ones, with the patience of a man who had done this many times and understood that some people needed the information delivered 4 ways before it settled. When Dennis finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Lorraine set the valuation report down on the table and looked at it. Then she looked at me. "You've known about this for how long?" "I found the vault a week ago. I retained Dennis 4 days ago. I'm telling you now." "Why didn't you tell us immediately?" Keith said. His voice had a note in it I was listening for, and I was relieved that it was wounded rather than accusatory. "Because I needed to understand what I was looking at before I brought it to anyone. And because I stopped." "Because what?" Lorraine said. "Because you were ready to sell the house for whatever the market would give us and split it 3 ways. And if I had told you on day 1, before Dennis had confirmed any of this, you might have done exactly that. And then whoever bought it would have gotten the mineral rights with the surface title, and we would have signed them away without knowing." The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable and necessary. Keith set down the geological report. He placed his hands flat on the table. "So Grandma Ola knew," he said. "She knew the whole time." I said, "So did Mama." "I think. If Mama knew," Lorraine said slowly, "then why didn't she ever say anything? Why did she let the taxes pile up? Why did she let the house get the way it got? Why didn't she just... She stopped, pressing her lips together. Because she was afraid, I said. The same people who pressured Grandma Ola pressured Mama. Look at the letters. I pushed the cigar box toward her. Read them. Read what those acquisition agents wrote to a woman living alone with 3 children and a business that was already struggling. And then ask yourself what Mama did with that fear. Lorraine opened the box. She picked up the first letter. She read it, then the second. By the third, her jaw was set in a way I recognized from childhood. The way Lorraine looked when she was working very hard not to cry. Keith was quieter than I had ever seen him. He sat looking at the mineral rights deed for a long time. Then he said, quietly, I called her the Hoarder House. To other people, I called it that. No one answered him. He didn't need an answer. The breakdown. It took Keith a long time to speak again after that. Long enough that the coffee had gone cold, and Lorraine had read all 11 letters and set them back in the box with care. The way you handle things once you understand their weight. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Something had gone out of it. The efficient, slightly impatient register he'd been using since he arrived. What was left was quieter, more effortful. I haven't been here, he said. I haven't. I came when I had to. I showed up at a funeral, and I brought a legal pad. He pressed his fingers to his forehead. And Mama, he stopped. She managed all of this. This whole, whatever this is. This responsibility. She managed it alone. She didn't manage it entirely alone, I said. That's what I'm trying to tell you. He looked at me. You knew. I didn't know about the vault, but I knew the house needed someone in it. I knew she needed someone who wasn't going to flinch at what it had become. I was here. That was my contribution. That was more than a contribution, Lorraine said. Her voice was low. That was Della. That was 14 years of your life. It was my choice, I said. Same as yours were yours. No. Lorraine shook her head. Don't make it that simple. I chose to leave and you chose to stay. And I let you carry it and told myself it was because you wanted to, because it was easier to believe that. She looked down at the table. I knew she wasn't well. I knew you were doing the heavy work. I sent money sometimes. I called on Sundays. She laughed once, short and without humor. I called on Sundays. There is a particular mercy in the truth when it finally comes into a room. It is not comfortable. It is not painless. But it is a mercy nonetheless. To look at something clearly after years of looking away. Keith was still looking at the mineral rights deed. What happens now, he said, legally. Dennis spoke. The mineral rights are part of the estate. They pass through the will equally to the 3 of you, as with the surface property. However, he paused, given the complexity of the mineral rights, the documentation, the history of outside interest in acquiring them, the current market landscape, I would strongly advise against any quick decisions. There are several options, and they should be considered carefully. What options? Keith said. Dennis outlined them. The rights could be leased to an energy company for extraction, generating royalty income while the surface remained in family hands. They could be sold outright for a lump sum payment in the range of the preliminary valuation, or they could be held while the geological assessment was deepened and the production potential more precisely determined, which might take 6 to 18 months but could significantly affect value. The back taxes, Keith said, $48,000, would be resolved entirely by any of these options, Dennis said, with significant funds remaining. Another silence. Then Keith looked at me. What do you want? He said. You've been thinking about this longer than we have. What do you want to do? I had thought about it. In the night hours, sitting with my grandmother's letter in my pocket, looking at the survey map spread across the work table in the shop that Earl built in 1971. I had thought about what Ola would have done and what Mama would have wanted and what the right shape of justice looked like, not vindictive, not theatrical, just right. I want to hold the rights, I said, not sell outright. Not yet. Get the full assessment done. Understand what we actually have. And I want the house to stay in the family, not to live in necessarily. The house is going to take significant work, and I understand that, but not sold off to developers. The house is in rough shape, Lorraine said carefully. I know the house, I said. I know what it needs. Keith looked at Lorraine. Something passed between them that I couldn't entirely read, but that looked, for the first time in years, like the two of them actually seeing each other. Okay, Keith said. Okay, we hold. There was one more conversation that needed to happen. Not with the lawyers, not with the geological consultants, not with the estate filings. With me and Keith and Lorraine. We had it that night. Late, after Dennis had gone home and the formal business was concluded, we sat at Mama's kitchen table with the narrow paths of the house all around us and the single overhead light making the room look amber and close. Keith said, I don't know how to apologize for calling it the Hoarder House. I know that. I know there's no clean version of that apology. I know you loved her. I said, I know the house was hard for you. The house was hard for me, he agreed. But hard for me to be in is different from what you lived. I understood that abstractly. I didn't think about what it meant in practice. For you, Lorraine had her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. She was looking at the window, which had gone black with night. I used to tell myself that staying would have been too hard for me, that I wasn't built for it the way you were. But I think what I really meant was that I didn't try. She glanced at me. I'm sorry for that. I don't need apologies. I said, I need us to be different going forward. What does that look like? Keith said, it looks like this conversation. I said, it looks like us actually talking about decisions before they're made, about what we want for this property and this family. Together, we talked for 2 hours about the house, what it would take to address the structural issues, the clearing, the repair, about the mineral rights, what the holding strategy would mean practically, about Mama, about what she had carried and what it cost her, and whether some of that cost could have been shared differently. It was not a comfortable conversation, but it was a real one, and at some point late in it, Keith said something that surprised me. Grandma Ola built that workshop, he said. She poured that concrete floor herself, with Earl, mostly her, from what I understand, and she put a vault in it. She did. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know any of that about her. I thought the house was just a thing that happened. I didn't think about the person who chose every piece of it. He paused. I'd like to know more about her. There are 40 years of letters in that workshop, I said, and her handwriting is on every shelf in there. He nodded. Yeah, he said. I'd like to read those. Part 3, Transformation and Justice. The full geological assessment took 4 months. Harwood Environmental sent a team in May, spent 2 weeks on the expanded parcel with instruments I couldn't name, and submitted their final report in late August. Dennis called me the afternoon it arrived. Higher end of the range, he said. Production potential in the upper tier for formations of this type. Rights value, revised upward. He gave me the number. I was standing in the workshop when he called. I had been refinishing the work table. The oak had cleaned up beautifully under the sander. Tight grain, old growth, the kind of wood that lasts because it started dense. I set the phone on the table and looked at it. Della? Dennis said. I'm here, I said. Okay, where are options now? We took the leasing route, as I had wanted. A company called Ridgeline Energy, smaller, regional, with a track record Dennis's colleagues confirmed as responsible, came to the table after Dennis made discreet inquiries. The negotiation took 6 weeks. The final lease terms included royalty percentages in the upper range of current market rates, an upfront signing bonus, and a surface use agreement that limited the footprint of any extraction infrastructure and protected the immediate yard and structure of the house. The signing bonus alone, paid upon execution, was enough to resolve the back tax debt in full, with a substantial sum remaining. The royalty income from production would come quarterly once extraction began. We split everything equally, 1/3 each. Keith and Lorraine did not argue about this. Neither suggested any other arrangement. Whatever the three of us had talked about at the kitchen table that night in March had done its work. But before the lease was signed, I asked for one thing. I brought it to Keith and Lorraine not as a demand, but as a request, which is a different thing. I want to stay in the house, I said. I want to oversee the repair and clearing, not as a payment, not as compensation. I know it. I know what it needs, and I want to see it become something Mama would have been glad of. Keith said, That seems right to me. Lorraine said, "It's your house in every way that matters. The paper just needs to catch up." We adjusted the estate distribution. The surface property went to me outright, at a fair assessed value, which was offset against my share of the mineral rights proceeds. Dennis worked out the numbers, so it was clean and equitable. The mineral rights royalties flowed equally to all three. Everyone signed. The clearing took 3 months. Not with a junk company in a dumpster. I couldn't do it that way. I hired a woman named Cora, who ran an estate clearing service in the county, and who understood the difference between what can be discarded and what is being discarded for the wrong reasons. We went through the house room by room, and for every box and bag and stack, I made decisions that were deliberate and unhurried. Some things went. Most of the accumulated paper, the damaged furniture, the bags and side bags gone. But other things emerged from the accumulation, like objects surfacing from water. A set of my grandmother Ola's china, wrapped in newspaper from 1974, perfectly intact. My great-grandmother's sewing box, full of spools and colors that don't get made anymore. Photographs by the hundreds, which I sorted carefully and divided into 3 sets. One for Keith, one for Lorraine, one for me. And beneath the accumulation in the back bedroom where my grandmother had died, a cedar chest, locked, the key tucked into an envelope taped to the bottom. Inside, more letters, more legal documents. A journal in Ola's handwriting spanning 1965 to 1989, and a photograph, framed, glass intact, the back of the frame hand-labeled in pencil in Ola's hand. Earl and me, 1971, workshop going up. In the photograph, my grandmother is standing in front of a half-built wall, her hair pinned back, her face turned toward the camera with particular expression of someone who has been working hard and doesn't mind being caught at it. She looks exactly like I imagined. She looks like someone who poured concrete floors in secret. I put that photograph on the mantel. The house took longer than the clearing. Old houses do. We found things that needed work that we hadn't known needed work. Some of the foundation sill plates, the electrical panel, 2 sections of the roof. But there were also things that surprised me with their soundness. The structural walls, which the code enforcement officer had flagged as potentially compromised, were solid once the interior was clear and an inspector could actually reach them. The bones of the house, as it turned out, were fine. Keith came up from Knoxville 3 times during the renovation. He and Lorraine both contributed to the repair costs from their shares of the signing bonus. Not because I asked, but because they offered. Keith spent an entire weekend helping lay subfloor in the back bedroom, and he was not bad at it, which surprised me. He said it was the first time he had done physical work on a building in 20 years, and that he had forgotten how useful it felt. We found the journal of his grandmother in the cedar chest. I gave it to him on the second visit. He sat in the kitchen, cleared now, the paths gone, the table visible from any part of the room, and read for 2 hours without speaking. When he finished, he set it down and sat quietly. She was trying to protect all of us, he said. She didn't know how to say it. She kept it all inside the house. She kept it all in the vault, I said. Safe. He nodded. Like Mama. Yes, I said. Like Mama. By the following spring, just over a year after Ruthanne Marsh died, on a Thursday morning in March, the house was livable. More than livable. The floors were refinished, and the walls were painted, and the windows repaired, letting a quality of light I hadn't seen in that house since I was a child. The narrow paths were gone. You could see from a front door to the back wall of the kitchen, straight through. I moved in properly on a Saturday in April, brought what I owned from the storage unit I had been renting, put it in the rooms where it belonged, hung Ola and Earl's photograph on the mantel, put my grandmother's china in the cabinet in the kitchen, set a small frame copy of the mineral rights deed on the shelf in the workshop. Dennis had suggested that, as a reminder, Travis from Code Enforcement came by in June on a routine follow-up visit after the renovation permits were closed out. He stood in the doorway of the front room and looked around at what the house had become. Well, he said, look at that. You're welcome to come in, I said. He stepped inside, walked slowly through to the kitchen, looked out the back window at the yard and the workshop, turned back to me. Your mama would be, he stopped, tried again. She'd be really glad of this, he said. I know, I said. I think she'd be surprised, but glad. He left, and I stood at the back door looking out at the workshop. The door was open, which it is now. Most days, the work table was visible from the doorway. The jars of sorted hardware were still on the shelves, labeled in Ola's hand. Behind the work table, flush with the concrete, the vault door sat closed. It is still there. It will stay there. Some things are meant to be kept as they are, not hidden anymore, but preserved. A reminder of what it means to build something against the pressure of the world, and seal it carefully and trust that the right person will know what to do with it when the time comes. The first royalty payment from Ridgeline Energy arrived in October. It was direct deposited, which felt somehow anticlimactic for a thing that had taken 3 generations to arrive at. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the number on my phone screen for a while. Then I called Keith and then Lorraine, and we talked for a long time, not about the money exactly, but about what it meant to finally be on the other side of something. Lorraine said she had started reading Ola's journal. She said she had not been able to put it down. Keith said he had framed the photograph of Earl and Ola building the workshop and put it in his office in Knoxville. He said sometimes he sat and looked at it when things got hard. He said it helped to remember that some things are built slowly and on purpose and against resistance, and they last anyway. I sat at my grandmother's table in my grandmother's house and thought about what it means to inherit something, not the legal meaning, not the deeds and the mineral rights and the estate distributions. The real meaning, the weight and the responsibility and the gratitude for the people who came before you and built things and protected them and trusted that you would understand, eventually, what they had done and why. The house breathes differently now. I notice in the evenings, when the day settles and the light goes amber through the clean windows, there is a quality to the silence in a house that has been lived in well, a fullness to it, a sense of presence that has nothing to do with occupation and everything to do with care. My great-grandmother kept this land. My grandmother hid its truth in a vault of her own making and fought the people who wanted to take it by refusing, simply refusing, for 40 years. My mother carried the fear of all of it alone and passed the key to the one person she trusted to use it correctly. And I stayed. I walked the narrow paths. I kept the lights on and the taxes as current as I could manage, and the back workshop locked until the moment came when it needed to be opened. It turns out that is not nothing. It turns out that staying in the right circumstances, in the right house, with the right understanding of what you're staying for, it turns out that is everything. The fields aren't really fields anymore. The farmland that once surrounded this property is subdivisions now, most of it, but the ground beneath the original parcel still holds what it has always held, and the house still stands. And in the workshop out back, the tools are still hung by type and size on the pegboard, and the jars of sorted hardware are still on the shelves, and the vault is closed but not forgotten. And every morning when I wake up in this house, I know exactly where I belong. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.